who gets to be a citizen of India? It sounds like a pretty straightforward question, doesn't it? But the answer, well, it's anything but simple. It's a story that's woven through decades of history, some major legal battles, and massive political shifts. Today, we're going to untangle the complex rules of Indian citizenship, all the way from how the Constitution first defined it, right up to the laws that control it today. So, here's our roadmap. We'll start with the absolute basics, what these legal terms actually mean. Then, we'll look at how the Constitution handled citizenship right at the very beginning. After that, we'll dive into the main law that's in charge now, the Act of 1955. We'll also explore how you can lose citizenship and, of course, unpack the very controversial 2019 amendment. And to finish it all off, we'll tie everything together with a quick summary. Let's get right into it. All right, first things first. Before we can get into the nitty-gritty of the laws, we have to get our definitions straight. We need to really understand the difference between being a citizen and a national. They might sound pretty similar, but in the eyes of the law, they are worlds apart. And this single distinction is the foundation for everything else we're about to discuss. The famous legal mind Hans Kelsen really put it perfectly here. The best way to think about citizenship is like having a membership card for a country. It's a formal legal status, and it's a package deal. On one side, you get a whole set of specific rights, like the right to vote. And on the other, you take on a set of duties, like, paying taxes and following the country's laws. So what's the real difference you're seeing here? Well, think of national as a really broad international term. It just means you belong to a country, even if you're living on the other side of the planet. But citizen, that's a much deeper, much narrower connection. It implies you actually live in the country. You have a permanent allegiance to it. And in return for that loyalty, you are granted core, fundamental rights that a non-citizen just doesn't get. Okay, now let's jump in a time machine. The year is 1950. India is celebrating its brand new constitution. And one of the first most massive questions the founders had to answer was this. On day one, January 26, 1950, who is officially an Indian citizen? The answer to that critical question is all laid out in Articles 5 through 11. The main starting block for all of this is Article 5. In this article granted citizenship based on a really important legal concept called domicile. Now, this is key. Domicile doesn't just mean you have an address in India. It means India is your permanent home, the place you always intend to come back to. This single idea was the foundation for everything else. So to get that membership card under Article 5, it was a two-part test. First, the big one. You had to have your permanent home, your domicile, in India. That was the must-have. But that wasn't enough. You also had to meet at least one of these three other conditions. Either you were born in India, or at least one of your parents was born in India, or you'd already been living there for the last 5 years straight. Just one of those three. So let's make this real with a classic court case. In the 1960s, a man named Mohammad Raza, who was an Iranian national, had been living and doing business in India since 1938. We're talking more than a decade. He argued that because he'd lived in India for so long, he should automatically be considered a citizen with domicile. And, on the face of it, it sounds kind of reasonable, right? This case put a huge question right in front of the Supreme Court. Is just living in a place for a really long time enough to establish it as your domicile, or does it take something more? Did Mohammad Raza's intention, what he was planning to do in the future, actually matter? And the court's answer was a crystal clear no. They denied his citizenship claim, and in doing so, they set down a vital legal rule. Domicile, they said, has two parts. You need both. First is factum. That's just a fancy term for the physical fact that you are living there. But the second, and this is the absolute clincher, is animus menendi. That is the intention to make that place your permanent home. Raza had the residence, sure, but because he kept registering as a foreigner, the court said he never had the intent. Another critical point the courts have made very clear is that in India you have only one domicile, the domicile of India. So you might be a resident of Maharashtra or Tamil Nadu or Assam, but your single, legal, permanent home is just India as a whole. The idea of having a separate state domicile simply does not exist in Indian law. Now, Articles 6 and 7 had to deal with the incredibly painful and complex reality of the partition of India. These were crucial rules for that specific moment in history. At its core, Article 6 gave citizenship to people who migrated from Pakistan to India, and Article 7 did the reverse. It said that a person who went to Pakistan after March 1st, 1947 generally lost their Indian citizenship. The last few constitutional articles basically tied up the loose ends. Article 8 covered people of Indian origin living overseas. Article 9 set a very clear rule that's still in effect today. If you voluntarily become a citizen of another country, you automatically lose your Indian citizenship. But the most important articles for the future, that would be 10 and 11. They handed Parliament the ultimate power to make and change all of India's citizenship laws from that point forward. And that power given to Parliament leads us perfectly into our next section, the Citizenship Act of 1955. If you think of the constitutional articles as the rules for day one, this act is the permanent rulebook that has governed who can become an Indian citizen ever since. The 1955 Act gives us 5 main ways to become a citizen. The most common is by birth in India, though you can see the rules on that have become much stricter over the years. You can also claim citizenship by descent if your parents are Indian, even if you're born abroad. Then there's by registration, which is often used by people of Indian origin or those who marry a citizen. For foreigners, there's a long process called naturalization. And finally, there's incorporation, for when a new territory becomes part of India. So we've gone over the ways you can get citizenship, but what about losing it? Well, the law is just as specific about how that can happen. The 1955 Act lays out 3 very distinct ways your Indian citizenship can end. First, there's renunciation. That's when you voluntarily declare that you want to give up your citizenship. Simple enough. Second is termination. This happens automatically the moment you voluntarily become a citizen of another country. And third, there's deprivation. This is when the government can actually take your citizenship away from you, but only for very serious reasons, like if you got it by fraud or have been disloyal to the country. And that brings us to one of the most significant and certainly most debated changes to this law in recent memory, the 2019 Citizenship Amendment Act, which you probably know better as the CAA. This amendment sparked huge discussions and protests right across the country. So what does it actually do? The CAA created a specific pathway to citizenship for a select group of religious communities, specifically Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains, Parsis, and Christians. The law applies to members of these communities who came from 3 specific countries: Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. And for anyone in that group who entered India on or before the cutoff date of December 31st, 2014, the law makes a big change. It reduces the required residency period for naturalization from 11 years all the way down to 5. Okay, we have covered a ton of ground, so let's pull back and look at the big picture with a quick summary. This is really helpful for understanding the core difference between the original constitutional rules and the permanent 1955 Act that came later. The key difference is really this. The Constitution's articles were a one-time snapshot, just for that moment in 1950. The 1955 Act is the living, breathing law for everyone since. You can also see a major shift in philosophy. The Constitution mostly favored jus soli, which is Latin for right of the soil, meaning you're a citizen because you were born on Indian land. The 1955 Act, on the other hand, leans much more heavily on jus sanguinis, or the right of blood, meaning you're a citizen because your parents are. So as we've seen, the idea of who is an Indian citizen has changed dramatically. It has evolved from a broad principle based on where you were born to a much more complex system based on ancestry, registration, and recent amendments. And that leaves us with a final question to think about. In our constantly changing world, what does it truly mean to be a citizen? And how should that identity be defined in the law?